Welcome to Feminist Question Time, brought to you by Women's Declaration International, which is the leading global organisation defending women's sex-based rights against the threats posed by gender identity ideology. There's more information on our website, womensdeclaration.com, where you'll find our Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights, which has been signed by 37,658 people from 160 countries and is supported by more than 518 organisations. We haven't updated it, but it's probably 523 now. We have many volunteer activists, including country contacts, engaged in defending women's rights, and do join us. You can help our work by joining us as a volunteer, donating, or we also have a member category that you can be in. Today, I am really delighted to say we have Luba Fein, who is going to talk about the title of her talk, Beyond Rhetoric, the European Council and the Misrepresentation of Sex Industry Exploitation. Then we're going to hear from Louise Distras. Luba is from Israel, and then Louise from the UK, and the title of Louise's talk is TERF is the New Punk. Then we're going to hear from Dr. Maja Bowen from the UK as well, criticism of the practice of enabling men to breastfeed. And then we're going to hear from Venice from the UK, the ladies' pond on Hampstead Heath. #LetWomenSwim. So our first speaker is Luba Fein. This is an important thing that's just come up, the European Council and the Misrepresentation of Sex Industry Exploitation. So it's really great to have you on now to update people on what's going on, why it matters, and hopefully what we can do about it. So over to you, Luba.
So what happened was that about 3 weeks ago, the Commissioner for Human Rights of the Council of Europe published a statement titled Protecting the Human Rights of Sex Workers. It was a problematic statement that undermines the efforts of hundreds of feminist organizations and dozens of prostitution survivor organizations to eradicate the sex industry. Today, I want to talk to you about this statement, who is the commissioner, what is the meaning of the statement, why me and other abolitionists are pissed so much about it. So let's start. First of all, who is the Commissioner for Human Rights of the Council of Europe? The Council of Europe, which includes 46 countries, created the position of Commissioner for Human Rights in 1999. The Commissioner itself does not represent a specific country in Europe. He or she ensures that countries pay attention to and respect human rights. The commissioner is responsible for numerous tasks like visiting countries, talking with policymakers, studying issues related to human rights at local and regional levels, making reports, making statements, and teaching others about importance of human rights in different fields. The commissioner works with many different groups like European Union and its institutions, the United Nations and its groups and procedures, and many others. So the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe elects the Commissioner for Human Rights every 6 years. This is a non-renewable term of 6 years, and the current commissioner is Dunja Mijatovic. Who is Dunja Mijatovic? She is a jurist and an activist from Bosnia. She is an expert on media law and regulation. She served from 2010 to 2017 as the OSCE representative on freedom of the media. And a short time before she's leaving her position and she is going to be replaced by another commissioner, she published this statement that I put in the chat, and I will discuss it now. So why do we have a problem with this statement? I will analyze the statement soon, but in short, to put it in one paragraph, it supports the existence, normalization, and institutionalization of the sex industry, which we obviously oppose. The very title, Protecting the Human Rights of Sex Workers, already indicates this. The term sex workers is a dog whistle that indicates support for the normalization of sex industry. Feminists, especially feminist prostitution survivors, don't call it work. We know it's abuse and exploitation. And we also understand that the only human right women in the sex industry want is to get out, to exit. Now let's analyze this statement in depth. But just for the next time you see anything titled human rights or sex workers, or just know this is a dog whistle, and this is for sex industry normalization. So for those who want to read a comprehensive critique of the statement, its inaccuracies and its distortions, I highly recommend the article on the Nordic Model Now website. I am attaching now this article to the chat. Please read it. It is very interesting. It is very expensive. The article was written by data analyst whose name is Jay Smith. Jay Smith analyzed they indicated many problems in the statement. So what I will say now, it will be very briefly. Yeah, this is the article, which is great. Okay, I will briefly address 3 points. The biggest problem in the statement that it removes the last masks that sex industry advocates used until a few years ago. Until a few years ago, maybe a decade ago, activists and apologists who tried to oppose the laws against sex buyers and pimps, they tried very hard to be apologetic. They insisted that they only protect those exploitative men because the women in prostitution need them. So they just they have to do it because women in prostitution need them so bad. They don't say women in prostitution, they say sex workers of all genders, but this is the point. So they usually say that if sex buyers and pimps are arrested, the women in prostitution are hurt, they have no income, they are in danger, and they're just, they don't like pimps and they don't like sex buyers, but they're forced to protect them. I can refute the claim that sex buyers or pimps are beneficial for women in the sex industry, and I did it in my previous conversations here, but today this is not my topic. My topic is that protecting the pimps used to be more apologetic in the past. Nowadays, like in Dunia Mijatović's statement, which you can read in the chat, the focus on sex buyers and pimps is very obvious. The document repeats over statements like this. I'm reading from the statement. According to sex workers, organizations, and rights defenders, the criminalization of third parties, even in the absence of criminalization of sex work itself, automatically and directly affects sex workers themselves, as their working space overall becomes criminalized with the increased stigmatization of their work and greater risks of violence. So she says that criminalization of pimps endangers those in prostitution, but pimps are centralized in her statement very much. In a 7-page, even 6-page document, the word third parties, which stands for pimps, it is repeated 6 times. 6 times, third parties, brothel operators. So in my opinion, there is not much time left until the sex trade, the apologists will say openly, what have they done? They're just running a business. We are going there. very, very fast. So the second problem, centralization of pimps. Now the second problem with the document, that it repeatedly insists that the criminalization of pimps leads to violence against the population in prostitution. It leads to violence and stigmatization. But this claim, it repeats itself, but it is not proven actually in any way. I do not see any country with a liberal legal framework where severe violence does not take place in the sex industry. And I know no country where women in the sex industry do not suffer from stigma. In countries with the legalization that normalizes the sex industry, in New Zealand, several states in Australia, Germany, we witness continuous violence against women in prostitution. And we can also see that most women in prostitution continue to hide their identity even many years after they exit prostitution. So we don't really know any country where women in prostitution say, we are not ashamed, we are proud of doing it. It is stigmatized everywhere. And it is violent everywhere. The violence is in prostitution, not in the legislative framework. Now, what is the example that Dunja Mijatovic gives us? She cites Belgium as a positive example. She says, in a landmark change in legislation adopted in consultation with sex workers, Belgium became the first European country to decriminalize sex work in 2022. Notice, May 2022, it was less than two years ago. And she says, as a result, sex workers became able to legally work as self-employed workers and build up social rights. Since summer 2023, less than 1 year ago, a new law has extended labor rights also to sex worker employees, including rules around working hours and payment, the right to refuse clients, and the mandatory availability of emergency buttons in every room. The new law also decriminalizes third parties who will no longer be penalized for opening a bank account for sex workers or renting out accommodation. So this statement is one continuous gaslighting. Let's see why. First, the law change in Belgium was made less than 2 years ago. Still no conclusions, still no follow-up report, nothing has been published yet. But there is something I wonder about. If the sex industry is not inherently violent, or it stops being violent after being decriminalized, why do we need emergency buttons in every room? Like I worked in different offices many years of my life. I never had the emergency button. Why emergency button? This is a very extreme measure that signifies extreme violence. Another, my second problem, why I think that this statement is extremely dishonest. It says, as a result, sex workers able to legally work as self-employed workers. This is true around the world. Under any legal model, legalization, decriminalization, call it whatever you want, women or in prostitution, they are not employees. They are framed as freelancers, which means they are not eligible for labor rights. They are not protected by labor law. And still the same statement by Dunja Mijatovic says that a new law has extended labor rights to sex worker employees. She is a jurist. She is an educated person. She understands the contradiction between the freelance law of so-called sex work and the term labor rights. So something is extremely dishonest here. And also, what bothers me maybe most than anything else is the example of third parties who are no longer persecuted. Each is lacking integrity. She mentions someone opening a bank account for sex workers. Like, she's trying to say that the bank teller could be criminalized for opening a bank account for a prostitute. I have no idea where did they happen. I think it never happened. It never happened anywhere. When legal frameworks talk about third parties, or when we activists talk about third parties, we mean pimps. We mean third-party profiteers, people who profit from hell and from suffering and abusing of women and prostitution. Nobody is talking about bank tellers. Nobody is talking about waiters or barmen who made a cup of coffee for a prostitute, and nobody is talking about a bus driver who drives the bus where a woman in sex trade is going somewhere. So this is very dishonest. Those people, bank tellers, were never arrested. Only pimps are arrested, and you know what you said. Even the pimps are not arrested enough. Even when criminalized, they are not arrested enough. So I feel like the entire statement is strategy of gaslighting. And my last problem with this statement, and many similar statements, is the repetition of the claim that this position, it is not of the author of the document. It is not her. It is not by Dunja Mijatović, but it comes from some sex worker organizations. And it sounds like officials, policymakers, people who affect policies, they just asked people who experience the horrors of the sex industry what they really need. And they just posted their wishes. But this is not the case, because first, sex workers organizations, it's a concept that exists, but they do not necessarily consist of people in prostitution or who have been to prostitution. They have many other stakeholders. They can have pimps, they can have sex buyers. Very often they have academics and activists, people who have not been in prostitution, and now they affect policy change under the title sex worker organizations. Another problem, there are dozens of organizations of the sex industry survivors in the world, but they're never invited and never asked to talk or to advise by officials who believe in the concept of sex work is work. When those officials are asking only for opinion of people who call themselves sex workers or sex worker organizations, this is a source of huge self-selection bias, because they initially they will never invite people who think that sex worker is an offensive and misleading title. And so whoever does not believe in this terminology, like me, you and me, they're silenced. And the last one, majority of the population in prostitution, they are silenced, marginalized women. We, according to conservative estimations, we have between up to 100 million women, men, and children in prostitution around the world. Most of them are very marginalized. They do not speak English. They have no access to the internet. They are terrified. They are threatened, extorted by pimps, who experience this hell every day. And they will never reach the position of talking to the Commissioner for Human Rights of the Council of Europe. You should be very privileged to talk to her. Anyway, so it is very unfair to speak on their behalf and claim that what they want is a business license for their pimp. I am pretty sure they have many other priorities. Thank you for listening to me.
We're going to go on to our next speaker now. This is Louise Distras from the UK. And Louise Distras is a punk singer from Wakefield, West Yorkshire. When she spoke out and refused to say trans women are women, the music industry turned its back on her, and this is her story. Thank you so much for coming, Louise. I know lots of people have been saying how fantastic it is that you're coming. We're going to get to hear from you, so welcome, and over to you.
I'm an independent singer-songwriter. I'm not very clever, not as clever as the women here today, but I'd like to think I can write a decent tune or two once in a while, and that's my weapon. A little bit about me. I released my first single, The Hand You Hold, on International Women's Day in 2012. Before the lockdowns, I was an internationally touring musician. I've released 2 albums, been in Kerrang, had my songs played on Radio 1, blah, blah, blah. And it's been a pretty nasty past 12 months for me since the music industry turned its back on me because I stated biological fact. And but my attitude is still the same now as what it's always been, which is here's me, here's my music. If you don't like it, you can naff off. And I think that it's a good thing to be an individual and do your own thing, not follow the herd mentality. So to tell my story properly, I need to go back to the beginning really and talk a little bit about what it was like for me growing up as a young woman in Wakefield, because from a very young age, you know, I was very aware that I was being preyed upon, and I felt very unsafe in myself. So when I was 16, I ran away from home, and I've spent some time in women's shelters and found myself in a lot of dangerous situations with dangerous blokes who took advantage of me. And looking back, I can see that it was these traumatic experiences that left certain wounds and vulnerabilities on me that left me wide open to being exploited by the predators and pimps of the music industry later down the line. So it's these experiences, these early experiences that I had, which are at the core of me, and this is the reason why I care so much about freedom of speech and defending my hard-won rights as a woman in a male-dominated music industry. It's well known that the music industry is very misogynistic, and I'm sure that a lot of women would say that the music industry is also well overdue its own Me Too moment. Part of my story is that I spent almost 10 years working with a man who identified as a record producer, and you know, he controlled every aspect of my life, isolated me from my friends and family. It was like being in a cult. And when I tried to walk away from this guy, he blocked the completion of the release of my new album, Beauty After Bruises, and, you know, put rumors around the industry that I was a drug addict and stealing money from my fans, and along with all the usual crazy making problematic tropes. And this is what led to what I would call my first cancellation, but in comparison to what I'm experiencing now, I would call it more like a soft cancellation or a mini cancellation. So when the lockdowns hit, I saw an opportunity to get to safety and get away from the situation that I was in. And you know, I'm sad to say that my story isn't unique, and I'm not the only woman in the music industry that this has happened to. So that's why I think it's really important to speak about this. In terms of gender ideology, I first started questioning what was happening in winter 2021. My ex-guitar player started a relationship with this man in a dress boyfriend, and together they ganged up on me and they accused me of a transphobic hate crime, and they reported me to the police. And I got investigated for a few months, but then it got dropped. And I later discovered that this man in a dress had served time for attempted murder and is also banned from playing women's football. This man in a dress is a musician as well, and he posts a lot of pictures on social media that he makes. It's like AI generated like anime portraits of himself, depicting himself as a little girl, which is just, you know, beyond questionable. And so that's what resulted in me first starting to question this gender ideology. And from there, I discovered women like Kelly J. Keane and the famous artist Birdie Rose, Women's Rights Network, and everything that these women were saying, it just made sense to me, you know, which is that there's only two sexes, mutilating autistic kids is child abuse, and the recognition of biological sex is important to maintaining our hard-won rights as women. And it's not rocket science, is it? It's just reality and common sense. And this is a view that's shared by most people. And also for me as a musician, you know, and a gobshite, you know, I think that when the establishment and the corporations support you, but that means that you are the establishment. So for me, you know, being a TERF is about as punk rock as it gets. I think TERF is totally the new punk. So after taking some time away from the music industry, last year I came back with my new album and all these experiences and this story inside of me, which I've wanted to tell for such a long time. And I did the exact same thing as what I've always done, which is just, you know, sing my songs, speak about my own life and my own music as I see fit. If you don't like it, you can naff off. And it was in May last year when I first expressed my opinions about gender ideology publicly. And pretty much overnight, all the platforms which championed me, they denounced me. I was labelled a right-wing Nazi, a transphobe. I was blacklisted by music journalists who said that I deserved to be thrown out of the music industry. And I started receiving rape and death threats on social media, mostly from like, you know, anonymous accounts run by what I call these, you know, pro-mutilation activists. Some of them also tracked down my address and turned up at my house as well. So I asked my booking agent at the time, Midnight Mango, that they were booking a tour for me to promote the release of my new album. And I asked them for help to keep me and the women who come to my gigs safe from these activists. And my concerns fell on deaf ears. And I was told, you know, our position as a company is clear. Trans women are women, and if you continue to publicly deny that trans women are women, your position is going to have detrimental effects on your career. To which I responded, well, no, you know, let the audiences decide for themselves who they want to buy tickets to go see. Let the ticket sales do the talking. If I wanted moral guidance, I'd go see a priest, not my booking agent. But again, fell on deaf ears and they stopped booking my shows. So with the music industry turning its back on me, my booking agency not doing their job, radio won't touch me, music journalists won't talk to me anymore, I decided to speak out. And alongside 5 other women, I was interviewed by the Daily Mail about my experiences. And then Billy Bragg waded in to give me some fashion advice on Twitter, which, let's face it, nobody wants to hear that. And yeah, it all went downhill after that. And so I started promoting my Bandcamp page. And if I don't know if anyone knows what Bandcamp is, but it's like Spotify but for independent musicians. So I put my discography on there and started selling you know, downloads, vinyls, CDs, things like that. And then at the end of October 2023, Bandcamp, they shut down my artist page without notice and my discography disappeared. Along with my income already held on the platform, which is the only remaining income stream I had after being blacklisted from everywhere. So Bandcamp, you know, they kicked me off. They stole my money, basically. I contacted them to find out what had happened, but with them being an international company that operates outside UK jurisdiction, it turned out to be impossible to challenge Bandcamp's decision to deplatform me or even find out why they did it. So Freedom in the Arts, a new organisation founded by Rosie Kay and Denise Farmy, they wrote to Bandcamp and they raised my case online with the Culture Secretary, Lucy Fraser. But this is 5-6 months later now, and we've still had no response. And then since Bandcamp shut down my page, it's been almost impossible to reach the international audience I once did and earn enough income to pay my bills. Especially in the cost of living crisis. And you know, as a self-employed musician, it's been difficult to challenge, you know, these rumors and attempted cancellations and defend myself from the constant attacks on my reputation and livelihood, because, you know, I don't have recourse to a trade union or litigation as somebody would as an employee. So as this was all happening towards the end of last year, you know, my situation was beginning to escalate wildly out of control. And in December, several vexatious reports were filed about me to West Yorkshire Police. And, you know, West Yorkshire Police, they already have got quite a reputation for overstepping the mark when it comes to free speech issues. So just before Christmas, I was arrested. And then when they came for me, I was in the shower, I was washing my hair. And their justification for arresting me was what I said during my appearance on GB News and my speech at the Let Women Speak event in Leeds. And what I said there is only the same as what I'm speaking about here today. So, you know, who knows? I might get another knock on the door. So let's see what happens. So yeah, the Rozzers carted me off down the station. They took my fingerprints, my DNA. I spent 5 hours in custody, and then I was released with no further action to be taken against me because obviously I hadn't committed any crimes. But you know, the manner in which I was arrested and then forced to endure the indignity of getting dressed in front of an officer with a body cam, it's an absolute piss take, and they totally overstepped the mark. And you know, we do have a problem here in the UK, like with situations like this. And this whole saga raises a lot of questions for me about the law around speech becoming increasingly subjective and blurred. And I think it's pretty clear that certain individuals are abusing these systems, which are meant to protect women in this ongoing attempt to intimidate us and stop us from speaking out. I mean, we've seen a perfect example of that this week on Twitter when Bangladesh Willoughby reported J.K. Rowling to the police. You know, it's absolutely pathetic. So while all this has been going on, I've had to start legal proceedings to try and put a stop to this ongoing campaign of harassment, stalk, and malicious communications. And frustratingly, my lawyers, they've advised me not to speak about my case publicly because these proceedings have been brought about by people personally connected to me. But what I can say is that, you know, I am facing this battle and the prospect of needing to raise funds for my defence because of the legally held views that I express online. And I know that I'm not the only person in this situation either. So now I'm going to trial in April, where I'm going to be engaging in arguments about my personal rights to free speech and express personal opinions in my musical and artistic work. And I have to say that after these past 12 months, I am absolutely exhausted, you know. I didn't ask for this fight. All I wanted to do was just go out there, sing my songs, play my gigs, and safe in the knowledge that I and the women who come to my gigs would be safe. But at the end of the day, you know, speaking my mind publicly is what making music is all about. And I think that freedom of speech and freedom of expression and our hard-won rights as women are something that should be defended at all costs, no matter what ism we're living under, you know. And if we can't defend our, if we don't have freedom of speech, then we can't defend our rights as women, can we? So looking back at the whole kind of picture of what's gone on so far, I think that I was pretty naive to hope that my booking agency or anybody else in the music industry would be willing to assist me in any way. I mean, you know, the booking agency Midnight Mango, for example, they've got an EDI, or is it DEI, EDI department. So, you know, by their own admission, these industry gatekeepers and these music platforms like Bandcamp, you know, they're not neutral in this at all. And it's clear to me from my own personal experience, the way I've been treated, that women musicians, women artists like myself, you know, we're no longer able to talk about our own lives and our own work as women without facing threats to our safety, being called a transphobe and a bigot or a Nazi at every turn. And I think that this is highly reflective of how ideologically captured that the music industry has become now. It's more like a cult, really. And it's not just happening at, like, you know, the Brit Award level. It's happening at a grassroots level to artists like myself, who are not necessarily well known. And it's one of the reasons why you never hear of us, because, you know, this wokery, this cancel culture, It's designed to kill art and creative expression at the root. And I believe that to limit speech is to limit thought. To limit thought is to destroy creativity. And in an industry which is supposed to be built on freedom of expression, all that's going to foster is shit music, to be fair. And that's why there's no good music that comes out of work. So, but I can count on one hand the number of women musicians who've actually had the courage to speak up about gender ideology without apologising. I mean, I know a couple of these women are watching this. We've got Thistle, we've got Iwa Juska as well. And over the past 12 months, I have found myself in some very lonely and frightening situations. Much to my dismay, it's been mostly women in the music industry who've targeted me. And this is very disheartening for me because I've had some horrible experiences, and I know from personal experience that about these abuses that are committed by men towards women within my own industry. And it's something that I have a lot to say about. I would love to sit down with these women who target me and ask them, why are you throwing women like me under the bus in order to protect the feelings of violent fetishistic men? Why are you promoting the mutilation of children? It's out there now. It's public knowledge in the WPATH files. It's proven gender medicine is unregulated. It's medical experiments on children and vulnerable adults. We know this is one of the worst medical scandals in history. Why are women in my industry rejecting the evidence of their own eyes and abandoning their hard-won rights in order to have a successful career in an already male-dominated industry? I'm an artist. I'm not a propagandist. This doesn't make any sense to me to deny reality like that, So, but that being said, there's been an awful lot of support for me, but it's come from outside of the music industry. And in a personal way, after having a horrible upbringing and running away from home, it's now at this point in my life, I'm 36 now, 37 in a couple of weeks. And for the first time in my life, I've found some really wonderful, positive, healthy women role models in my life. And I've found a wonderful support network from within our movement. The famous artist Birdie Rose, she did a wonderful talk on here about a year ago. She's been like a rock to me. She's a really good friend of mine. And then another great support to me has been Denise Farmy. Denise won her employment tribunal in June last year around harassment due to her gender critical views. She's been fabulous. She transferred the remaining balance on her crowd justice campaign to my campaign. And it's really all thanks to, an angry army of women that I've been able to pick myself up off the floor and start fighting back. And after what's happened over the past 12 months, that's where I'm at now. I'm starting to fight back and getting my mojo back. So, and this time last year, I was completely alone as a musician, but now I'm one of a growing list of artists who are criticising cancel culture and speaking up about gender ideology. And together we're building a proper counterculture that's coming together, organically. And despite everything that I've experienced over these past few months, I think that as an artist, there's never been a more exciting time to be an artist. And there's so much going on in the world. There's so much to talk about, so much to sing about. Being arrested and fighting this legal battle, it's certainly got in the way of what I'd rather be doing, but it hasn't stopped me from writing new music. I'm writing a new album at the moment. I've been recording some demos this morning. It's because I want to start recording my new album after my trial in April, and I'm performing at a festival in August as well. I'm really looking forward to playing live again, because for me, singing my songs is how I think I can best serve this fight. And I know that for every woman who faces a cancellation or like an attempted cancellation, I know that there's many, many, many more of us that are too scared to speak up for fear of being targeted, fear of emotional and financial ruin. So for me, this makes it even more important for me to not give in to this bullying. And I really want everybody's support for me by winning my court case. And being able to share the gift of new music, so that I can show that, no woman in the music industry should ever be hounded for stating biological facts. And as I said earlier, you know, speaking my mind is what making music is all about. And I'm an artist. I don't belong in a police station or a courtroom. I belong in a recording studio or on stage. And that's how I can best serve this fight. We all have our own ways and our own, you know, ways of doing this. And I think that that's something, you know, we should to celebrate. So yeah, once the trial's over, I'm really looking forward to concentrating on being a musician again. And really, that's really kind of my story up to this point. And thank you so much for having me in this space and letting me share it with you. I hope this time next year I will have something else to talk about.
We're going to go now to our next speaker, who is Dr. Maja Bowen. Now, Zan Dalio is going to introduce her, so I'm going to hand over to Zan to do that introduction.
About 3 weeks ago on Twitter, a story broke. The headline was, "Trans women's milk as good as breast milk, says NHS Trust." The byline said, "Drug-induced chest feeding liquid comparable to that from mothers when it comes to baby nourishment, claim hospitals." Not one hospital, but hospitals. Okay, so then there was the necessary spate of formal and informal commentators, including Millie Hill, Emma Hilton, and La Scapagliata, who is Maja, who wrote, who tweeted, "As the gaslighting and child endangerment via state-sanctioned promotion of male lactation fetish ramps up again, here's an excerpt from my book that analyzes this issue from a medical perspective." And so that's what Maja is going to share with us, Maja and Lorelei. So take it away, girls.
I first wrote about this in 2018, when the first famous study in this area came out. And later on, I modified that essay and expanded on it for my book, Born in the Right Body, which came under my pseudonym Isidora Sanger. So we agreed that I will just read that essay and then take questions, or I'll be in the breakout room as well, and we can talk there. So here it goes. In 2018, media outlets all over the world reported on a case study where a doctor and a nurse at a clinic in the United States used a cocktail of drugs to enable a male patient, who identified as a woman, to breastfeed a newborn baby. A UK expert commented that this was an exciting research which could lead to more cases of transgender women breastfeeding. According to the authors of the study, who are called Reisman and Goldstein, the male patient, who they refer to as a she throughout the write-up, claimed that his partner, who was the baby's mother, was pregnant but not interested in breastfeeding, and that he was hoping to take on the role of being the primary food source for this infant. However, reading the paper, I could not find any evidence that the authors interviewed the mother to verify their patient's claims, or that they obtained informed consent from the mother by discussing the risks that male drug-induced galactorrhea, which is an abnormal nipple discharge unrelated to milk production during pregnancy, and breastfeeding could pose to the baby. They did report that their patient had a history of gender incongruence, but had no gender reassignment surgeries, which means that he was a fully sexed male at the time of this study. His gender-affirming regimen included spironolactone, which is a heart medication used in this case as an androgen blocker, estradiol, and micronized progesterone. This man was also taking occasional clonazepam and zolpidem for panic disorder and insomnia. At the initial appointment, the patient had gynecomastia, which is an abnormal enlargement of a man's breasts, usually due to hormonal imbalance or certain medication, which was likely a side effect of the spironolactone and cross-sex hormones he was taking. his serum testosterone level on initial examination was unclear because two markedly different values were given, 256 nanograms per deciliter in the body of the text and 20.52 nanograms per deciliter in the results table 1. The authors reported no further testosterone data, which indicated that they did not measure the patient's testosterone level at any other point in the study. In order to make sense of this glaring inconsistency, I took into account the evidence that 3/4 of trans-identified men on spironolactone and estradiol failed to reach testosterone levels within the female range. I concluded that the higher figure is likely to be correct and that this patient's testosterone was not adequately suppressed, despite the authors emphasizing that androgen blockade was an important part of the prescribed regimen. While the testosterone level of 256 might be slightly low for a man, the normal male range is 265 to 923, it still far exceeds the normal female testosterone range, which is 15 to 70. In cases of polycystic ovarian syndrome or PCOS, the female testosterone levels are increased, but they're still lower than 150. Whereas female testosterone levels that exceed 200 are suggestive of an ovarian or adrenal tumor. There is a paucity of research into the effects of elevated testosterone on breast milk and on breastfed infants. In one case report, a postpartum woman with depressive symptoms was given testosterone, both orally and vaginally in unknown doses, as well as subcutaneously, which means under the skin, via 100 milligram testosterone pellet to improve her mood. The study concluded that, quote, testosterone was very low in infant blood at baseline and during testosterone therapy by pellet implant. There were no adverse clinical effects in the infant after 7 months of continuous testosterone therapy to the mother by subcutaneous pellet implant. Testosterone delivered by sublingual drops, vaginal cream, and pellet implant was absorbed but not measurably excreted into breast milk, end quote. However, crucial details are missing from this study, such as the age and sex of the infant, as well as the extent of breastfeeding. I will also add that, follow-up, long-term follow-up needs to take place for us to really know what long-term effects this might have had. Another case study concerns a trans-identified female patient who was described as a transgender man resuming weekly testosterone injections at 13 months postpartum as a part of her gender-affirming therapy. This study showed that, quote, milk testosterone concentrations also increased with a maximum concentration of 35.9 when the lactating parent was on a dose of 80 milligrams subcutaneous testosterone cypionate weekly. The calculated milk/plasma ratio remained under 1, and the calculated relative infant dose remained under 1%. The infant had no observable side effects, and his serum testosterone concentrations remained undetectable throughout the study period. End quote. This study likewise did not report the extent of the breastfeeding, and significantly, the infant in this study was male and 13 months old. We already know that elevated testosterone in pregnant women inhibits breastfeeding, and it exposes fetuses to an hyperandrogenic environment in the womb. This can cause a variety of medical complications in girls, such as polycystic ovaries, insulin resistance, and congenital adrenal hyperplasia, as well as increased likelihood of gender nonconforming behavior in childhood. Considering that currently gender nonconformance increases the likelihood of a child being diagnosed as transgender, that this frequently results in pediatric gender reassignment, and that the effects of elevated breast milk testosterone on newborns of both sexes are not known, there are serious ethical issues here, including with the decision by clinicians to enable a man whose testosterone suppression isn't adequately demonstrated to breastfeed a potentially female infant. This brings me to another glaring omission in this report. While the authors consistently refer to their trans-identified male patient as a she, they never state the sex of the infant involved in this experiment. In addition to my concerns about high levels of testosterone in breast milk, this male patient is also reported to have used domperidone to stimulate galactorrhea. Domperidone is banned in the USA and is only used off-label internationally to induce lactation in women. Domperidone is sometimes used to treat reflux, but it has been discontinued for use in children under the age of 12 due to potential heart side effects. When domperidone is given off license to stimulate lactation, it requires ensuring that mother and infant don't have any contraindications to this treatment. And yet there was no evidence that the authors attempted to ascertain this. There's also no evidence that the patient stopped using clonazepam, which is a drug that can cause sedation in infants, or zolpidem, also known as Ambien, which could exacerbate the effects of clonazepam prior to commencement of breastfeeding. When we talk about the safety of medicines in breastfeeding, we weigh the benefits of mother's milk to the health of the child and of bonding between the mother and the baby against the risks of discontinuing the medication. If it is at all possible and medically justified, mothers who take medicines that could be passed to their babies via breast milk often decide or are advised either to discontinue medication or to not breastfeed in order to avoid adversely affecting the baby's health. Now, contrast this with a man taking unnecessary medications to induce galactorrhea just so that he can fulfill his desire to breastfeed. A word on males' desire to breastfeed. Psychosexual disorders such as transvestism and autogynephilia are present in a proportion of men who identify as women, and a breastfeeding fetish can be a feature of this condition, as the excerpt from the news article written by one such man illustrates. I quote, "Breastfeeding is freaky, not the sucking bit. You are reading The Stranger, so odds are you've had a titty sucked at some point in your life. No, it's because when my baby attached to my breast, there was an incredible chemical cascade that ran through my entire body like lightning. Imagine the most electric thing a partner has ever done to you, then multiply it by 10. I could feel my brain rewiring, creating pathways that would permanently connect me to my child. And yeah, I kind of got off on it. Don't judge." End quote. It should be said that there is some historical evidence of men occasionally breastfeeding babies in situations where breast milk or other adequate nourishment was not available, such as on long sea voyages after the death of a baby's mother. These men would have had medical conditions that abnormally elevated their prolactin levels and caused galactorrhea, such as pituitary tumors, and would have resorted to this in a desperate attempt to keep the baby alive, not because it was their desire to do so, despite an availability of appropriate food sources for the infant. It is thought that this purely helped infants survive mainly by maintaining hydration, not because it was an adequate substitute for the breast milk of lactating women. In the wake of this study, numerous attempts were made to equate drug-induced galactorrhea in men with the natural breast milk a mother produces after giving birth. This ideological narrative has gone so far that we have witnessed systemic replacement of the words breast milk and breastfeeding with phrases such as chest milk and chest feeding, and also human milk, in an attempt to normalize this practice. However, the research on the composition of male nipple discharge is very scarce, and the research into the effects of this type of fluid on infants is non-existent. In one study from 1981, the researchers collected monthly nipple discharge samples for 3 months from a 27-year-old man with elevated prolactin and likely pituitary cancer, pituitary adenoma. They then compared these samples to colostrum, which was collected during the last semester of pregnancy and 1 day postpartum, and breast milk collected between 1 and 12 months postpartum from normal lactating mothers. They concluded that, quote, the concentration of lactose proteins and electrolytes in the breast secretion of this man are within the range of colostrum and milk obtained from normal lactating women, end quote. However, looking at the results in more detail, the lactose level in the male patient's nipple discharge was nearly double that of colostrum, and sodium was just below the lower end of the normal range. More importantly, unlike mother's milk, male nipple discharge hasn't occurred as a consequence of growing a baby inside his body, and it is in no way tailored to an individual child or any child for that matter. Breast milk is the unique nourishment lactating mothers produce in order to sustain their own babies and protect them from disease in the weeks and months after birth, when the infant immune system is still not fully developed. First milk is called colostrum, and it starts being produced during pregnancy and then up until 4 days post-birth, which is a thick yellowish fluid full of fat, vitamins, and particularly rich in antibodies. Colostrum changes to a more calorific transitional milk over the following 2 weeks, which is high in fat and vitamins, and after that it becomes mature milk, which is 90% water. Maternal antibodies are first passed via the placenta to the baby during the last 3 months of pregnancy. And after the baby is born, he or she continues to receive antibodies through breast milk. As mother and baby share both the genetics and the environment, these antibodies are customized by the mother's body to offer an individually tailored passive immunity and protection from the pathogens the baby is most likely to encounter. Therefore, I found it strange that Reisman and Goldstein made no attempt to analyze the composition of their male patient's drug-induced nipple discharge, considering that they talked at length about the benefits of breastfeeding on mother and baby, none of which were applicable to their male patient, or indeed the infant he allegedly fed. Be that as it may, as a consequence of a cocktail of drugs and the breast pump, this patient is reported to have started to lactate, eventually producing 8 ounces of nipple discharge daily, 2 weeks prior to the birth of the baby. Although we have no further details about the volume, the study claims that whatever fluid was produced, it was the sole source of this baby's nourishment for 6 weeks. After this time, the patient reportedly started to supplement with 4 to 8 ounces of Similac brand formula daily. The authors give no indication that they observed this alleged breastfeeding or that they met the mother or the infant. They did state that, quote, the child's pediatrician reported that the child's growth, feeding, and bowel habits were developmentally appropriate, end quote, but they offered no corroborating evidence. Considering that a 5-pound baby needs about 12 ounces of breast milk or formula a day, and more as the baby's weight increases, it is extremely unlikely that any infant would survive for 6 weeks on 8 ounces alone. Furthermore, mothers who are unable to breastfeed know only too well how important it is to use adequate amounts of baby formula. Failing to do so can result in serious harm to the baby. I have no evidence that the baby who was allegedly subject to this experiment was harmed in any way. However, there are so many omissions, unknowns, and missing data that I cannot help but ask, why was a trans-identified man held to a drastically different standard of infant care than actual mothers? That this experiment was conducted by a transgender clinic, which neither has the license nor expertise to oversee the breastfeeding of a newborn, only adds to my concerns regarding ethics, safety, and biases in this study. It is my opinion that rather than constituting exciting new research, this study is fraught with incomplete and misleading information, disingenuous analysis, and undeclared conflicts of interest. That it was also reported as fact in the media, without any meaningful challenge from the mainstream medical community, makes me wonder if transgender research has lost sight of the bigger picture and has come to prioritize the emotional needs of trans-identified males over the welfare of women and children. I have a little addendum to my original essay that I added after the book was published, and that is to comment on two further studies. One study published in 2023 was titled Lactation Induction in a Transgender Woman, Macronutrient Analysis and Patient Perspectives by Amy K. Weimer, MD. All the criticisms from my above article apply, with the exception that this male participant had his testicles removed at 41, which was 5 years prior to this experiment, and therefore high testosterone level and related concerns were not a factor. How otherwise, the following problems persisted. Number one, there was no evidence of maternal consent. Number two, there was no mention of the sex of the baby. Number three, referring to the male participant as she and mother as a gestational carrier. Number four, it involved pathological male nipple discharge, which resulted from a severe hormone imbalance, and medications which caused galactorrhea was equated with normal physiological mother's milk. Number five, there was no observance of this alleged male breastfeeding. Number six, the analysis of male nipple discharge was yet again incomplete. For example, the presence of medications including the peridone, cross-sex hormones, or antibodies in the male breast fluid was not measured. Sodium was not measured, and it was lowish in another study. Other nutrients were, quote, at the same level or higher, which is not necessarily a good thing. And the comparison was with mature mother's milk, 70 to 94 days after delivery, not with colostrum or transitional milk appropriate for a newborn. Number seven, uniqueness of mother's milk to the baby and its fundamental difference from male nipple discharge wasn't explored. Number eight, the volume of this fluid was yet again inadequate at just 150 ml per day. But this was mitigated by the fact that mother was actually breastfeeding this baby the entire time as well. So number nine, if the infant had access to adequate nutrition, immune support, and bonding via breastfeeding from their own mother, and developmentally appropriate formula was available, should anything go wrong, the only reason this experiment was conducted was to satisfy the desire of a man not to benefit the baby. And number 10, in this male patient's own words, it, quote, would be a wonderful personal experience and it would be a great help for my partner, end quote. Since men can feed the baby with expressed mother's milk in order to help their partners, there was no practical or medical need whatsoever to conduct this experiment. The second study, called Lactation Induced in a Transgender Woman Wanting to Breastfeed case report, authored by Rachel Wombolt in January 2021, has exactly the same, very similar issues to Reisman and Goldstein. Number one, this was another case of gynecomastia and minimal volume, 3 to 5 ounces of male galactorrhea secondary to iatrogenic or clinician-induced hormone imbalance, and side effects of multiple medications, including, yet again, domperidone, cross-sex hormones, and androgen blockers. Number two, no study of composition of this fluid that was fed to the infant was done. Number three, there was again no corroborating evidence. Nobody observed this breastfeeding. There was no evidence of informed consent given by the mother, no exploration of ethics of involving an infant in an experiment that is chiefly designed to satisfy the desire of a man to breastfeed. Number four, this study states when talking about the male patient, quote, although this was not enough to meet the nutritional needs of her child, she felt encouraged that she was potentially contributing to the immunological health of her child. There is no evidence in existence that abnormal drug-induced male nipple discharge contributes to immunological health of babies who ingested. Crucially, none of the usual scientific protocols that are used to ascertain whether medications and food given to infants are safe have been followed in any of the studies in this area, and there is no long-term follow-up of the infants who are experimented on in these studies. And that's the end of the essay.
So we've got our final speaker now, which is fantastic. It's the first time It's Venice Allen, who is known as a TERF extraordinaire. She was on the streets and at the forefront of the struggle before many of us got involved, and has been charismatic and well organized and brilliant in many, many ways. Your talk's going to be the Ladies' Pond on Hampstead Heath, Let Women Swim. You went to the meeting last Sunday with the Kenwood Ladies Pond Association. And can you tell us what happened there and why you went?
Well, I'm a member of the Kenwood Ladies Pond Association, which, as I believe, has been an organisation for nearly 100 years, as has the pond. I believe, I could be wrong, it started a year later in 1926. But I've only been a member for a couple of years.
Not all that time.
I don't know any of the original members, although I have seen pictures of them, I believe, in the Bishopsgate Institute archive, which I recommend everyone who's interested in the Kenwood Ladies Pond visits, because there's some fantastic photos, real photos from like the 20s, the 30s.
And what is the Ladies Pond? What's it like for those of us who don't? Well, I know, but people who don't know.
Okay, so the Fleet River is one of the rivers that runs underneath London, and it comes from the north, and it goes down and it goes underground at Fleet Street. And so, but up in the north London on Hampstead Heath, the Fleet River joins together at the bottom of the heath, and on the west side you've got a series of pools, and on the east side you've got a series of pools. So on the west side you have the mixed pond, and that's on the Hampstead Village side. And then on the Highgate side you have these two, you have a series of ponds. One's a boating lake, one's for dogs, I think, and then you have two, one for women and one for men. And the women's one is particularly nice and secluded and surrounded by trees, I guess with the intention to keep men out and from looking at us.
Yeah, and you've been there, you've gone for many years. What's it like when you go there?
It's just extraordinary. I think when you go there for the first time, you're just like, for me personally, when I went for the first time as a very young woman, it was the space I didn't know I needed, this women only space that I didn't know existed or that I would enjoy so much. In those days, it was particularly nice. They had a little jumble sail rail and a cat. And there was no question in the 1990s that there would be transvestites or any of these type of characters who are male in there.
Yeah. And so what's happening now then? What did you say at the meeting?
Well, I didn't know. I haven't been that active in the pond campaign over the last year, so I didn't know that we were going to be outnumbered. And when we got to the hall, there were so many women there. And then we had the first vote for something on like who was going to be the chair or something. And then we realized that was it. We'd lost this whole thing. But it was still a very interesting meeting and very electric. If you can imagine, over 200 women. I think there were a couple of men there, but pretending to be women, but made overwhelmingly female room of passionate women wanting to save their space or open their space to their favorite boys. I
found that the women wanting to include men in the women's ponds, if they say they're women, are very, very keen to do that, and they see us as very bad people. They think we're very intolerant, and it is, I think, like you said, it's very electric, isn't it? That the atmosphere is they're very angry that we want to exclude men from that space. What did you find when you were there?
Yeah, I got very angry, you know, and I was all very friendly at the beginning, and then I realized how many of them were just so, but you know, there was a range was a range of women there, even the ones that voted against us. And I just wanted to say, well, this is what you've done. Once I realized that's what they were going to vote for, our motion wasn't my motion, but that I was voting for. Once they said that, I just sat there on my phone writing my speech, and then I just kept trying to say it once the motion had happened, and then they didn't want me to say it like on the microphone, so I stood on the chair, and I had to shout it really loudly, really quickly, because they were all going to leave. She said, "Oh, if you don't get off the chair, we're going to close the meeting." And to be fair, I don't think anyone objected when I said, "Well, close, can I swear on it?" And I don't think anyone really minded, because it was nearly 2 hours into it by that point. And so I stood on the chair and I said it. And then it was really good. I had no idea it would get such attention in the media.
And what sort of, because that's very interesting. This issue of the pond and it being a women's only space, it has had a little bit of media coverage with there was the Man Friday action.
Friday in 2018.
Do you remember that? And you were probably there, and it's yet another thing I wasn't at, but knew about. So
I wasn't out there, no.
There were some great actions about 4 years ago or 3 years ago where women went along and said they were men, and they called it Man Friday, and they'd go on into the men's pond wearing trunks. Were they actually wearing trunks, or were they wearing swimming costumes?
Some of them were.
One way or another, the men just didn't like it, and that got into the Daily Mail and various things. But what coverage have you had as a result of that after that meeting?
It was really interesting, because had I stood on the chair and done that like about four years ago, maybe even 2 years ago, or even last year, I think Pink News, used to write everything up that we used to do, when we had anything like that in a meeting. Pink News would say, horrible old bag stands on chair and humiliates herself.
Yeah.
But actually, Pink News did eventually cover this meeting, but they didn't even mention me in it. And it was just like how we lost the vote. But the Telegraph and the Mail, first of all, the Mail, and then the Telegraph picked up Talk TV. And they didn't, and they made me seem a lot better than I was, because I was absolutely like a ferocious old bag on the chair, but they sort of legitimized it, and I was very happy about that. And they also published my entire speech, both video and text. The funniest thing was, actually, if you don't mind this funny anecdote, that I sent it to a friend of mine who's not very connected to this issue. And I just sent her the whole Talk TV clip with Julia Hartley-Brewer. And she said to me, "Oh, very good. You very reasonably explained your position, and it's not a bad position. Unlike that woman shouting on the chair."
Men that you're so inclusive of attack or rape a woman or a girl, I want to remember that you voted for this. I want you to not wake up in the middle of the night and remember that you made that act of male sexual violence in a sacred women's space possible. Until then, enjoy maintaining your fantasy